You may think the Range Rover was born a follower, to be an expensive copycat to the intellectual coil that brought us the Jeep Wagoneer. That car appeared in 1962 and set in motion a chain of events which would lead us to the bleak landscape of crossovers that the automotive world finds itself in now. But actually no, the idea for the Range Rover predates Wagoneer, Bronco, and even Scout. It just took the success of the Wagoneer and friends to prove to Rover that the project was worth pursuing. In fact, the very result of that project will be held up in the most prestigious gallery as an example of something much more than just a vehicle. Here's why. The Second World War brought with it the first mass-produced four-wheel drive car, the ubiquitous Jeep. The usefulness of such a vehicle was proved in all combat theatres by all Allied forces. Following cessation of hostilities in 1945, surplus Jeeps quickly found their way into private hands, including the hands of enterprising people who could see the potential of the concept. Notably, this would result in cars such as Toyota's Land Cruiser and Rover's Land Rover, which was born on a Welsh beach in 1947. Maurice Wilks, Rover's chief engineer, wanted a car for civil use, similar to the Jeep but with more of an agricultural focus. It certainly was agricultural. While the Series 1 Land Rover quickly cemented its place in history, it retained much of the architecture of the Jeep that inspired it, such as its leaf springs, and was no more comfortable or refined. Almost immediately, Rover could see the potential for a vehicle that was a capable off-roader, but also comfortable, with features like a carpet or a heater, maybe even a roof that wasn't just canvas. Accordingly, in 1949, they teamed up with coach builder Tickford to produce the Land Rover estate car, which had, or at least made attempts at, a heater, carpet, and 7 cushioned seats. Unfortunately though, it was still very much a Series 1 Land Rover. But thanks to that Tickford bodywork, it was now very expensive. They sold less than 700 and dropped it in 1951. In 1952, Wilks changed tack and decided to try basing the project on a car rather than the Land Rover itself. Rover's P4 saloon was initially used for what would be called the Road Rover. These car-based efforts would remain two-wheel drive affairs, a true genesis of the crossover. They were designed to have long-travel coil spring suspension to provide refinement over rough ground, and also to be spacious, utilitarian estate cars. Several prototypes appeared in the early 50s, and it was almost put into production at one point. Although this decision was quickly reversed, as Rover were concentrating on upgrades to the Land Rover, as well as several versions of the normal P4, and didn't want to overstretch. The idea was kicked along during the 50s, with a Series 2 prototype appearing, visually more in line with the upcoming Rover P5, and heavily influenced by American station wagon styling, looking almost like a downsized Chevy Nomad at the rear. The Series 2 Road Rover gained the P5's independent torsion bar front suspension with disc brakes, as well as the 2.25 litre petrol engine. 5 more prototypes were produced, and the car came very close to production in the late 1950s, but ultimately again the idea was shelved. The prototypes went to various Rover staff and ended up seeing some use on the road. As the company moved into the 1960s, attention was focused on the upcoming P6, which in turn drew attention to the possibilities the American market could bring. As it happened, at that time the American market was starting to see those aforementioned SUVs like the Bronco and the Wagoneer. Wilkes' nephew, Charles Spencer King, joined the Rover company in the mid-60s, and along with Gordon Bashford, began to look at possibilities in the Road Rover vein to capture the new SUV market. The new American offerings were all four-wheel drive, and it was quickly decided that Rover's SUV would have to be as well. Above all, the vehicle would have to behave well both on and off-road. Spen felt that independent, long-travel suspension would be the best way to go here, in order to provide comfort and to keep wheels in contact with the ground as much as possible. Rover had an excellent engine available for this project, in the form of the old Buick 215 V8, which Rover had purchased the rights to in the mid-1960s to go into the P5. The all-aluminium unit was lighter than many four-cylinder engines and well suited to the smaller British cars. Now known as the Rover V8, the engine gave great low-rev torque, ideal for an off-roader. The vehicle's four-wheel drive system would be permanently engaged to split the torque between both axles and keep them unstressed. The wheelbase was 99.9 inches, rounded up to 100 for the project name, becoming the 100-inch station wagon. The composition was kept as simple as possible, with a steel frame and aluminium body panels. The first full-size mock-ups were ready by 1967. In the background, Rover was bought by the Leyland Motor Corporation in 1966. Donald Stokes, head of Leyland Motors, was very pleased with the prototypes and rubber-stamped further development. King and Bashford had put together a design to accommodate their engineering, which management liked so much that it would end up being very close to the final David Bash design. Bash was tasked with simply tidying up the prototype, with the main area being around the grille and headlights. The final prototypes were tested in some of the harshest climates globally, wearing badges which said Velar, from the Spanish to keep secret or hidden. The initial press cars for review would carry this name on the tax books too to keep the final model name a secret. The Range Rover was finally launched on the 17th of June 1970, an instant success. In no small part thanks to the unique appeal of the vehicle. This wasn't another Wagoneer, it was something more. It was compared to the Wagoneer and Bronco simply because that was the closest thing there was, but this was different. The Range Rover was almost instantly a status symbol, to show others you were above them, quite literally by sitting higher than they were. The utilitarian lines, by the engineers rather than the designer, form following function, were very attractive. Large vertical door handles were born out of practicality, but somehow managed to be more appealing than any deliberate design. A quarter-scale model was duly displayed inside the Louvre as an outstanding piece of modern sculpture. In true Land Rover style, the original Range Rover stayed in production for about 25 years. A 5-door body style was added in 1981, gaining British Leyland parts bin door handles from the Austin Metro and losing the elegant vertical handles of the early cars. This did come at benefit to the rear seat passengers, who traditionally struggled. The 5-door was so popular that the 2-door was phased out in the UK in 1984, although it did continue in France until 1994. The car was home to all manner of BL parts, notoriously in later years the instruments of the Austin Maestro. The dashboard of the Range Rover was in fact the first appearance of David Bash's symmetrical layout, which was also later seen on the Rover SD1. Both sides were moulded the same for ease of manufacturing either hand-drive models. The original and reliable 3.5-litre V8 later gave way to bored-out versions, 3.9 and then 4.2 litres, mated to Lucas fuel injection systems, which were less reliable. Rover did attempt to dieselise the V8 in collaboration with Perkins. This was known as Project Iceberg, and resulted in the creation of both turbocharged and naturally aspirated diesel engines. Unfortunately, these failed quickly under the higher compression of diesel operation. The project was soon abandoned, but the higher strength crankshaft castings did end up on the 4.2 petrol version. For the European market, a diesel engine did make it into the Range Rover. In 1986, the Italian VM Motori 2.4 turbo diesel was fitted. These were increased to 2.5 in 1989 and eventually switched to the 200 and 300 TDI engines from the Defender range in the 90s. For transmissions, originally only a 4-speed manual was offered. In 1977, the option of an overdrive was added. In 1982, the Chrysler TorqueFlite 3-speed auto transmission became available, and eventually a ZF 4-speed auto in 1985. The Range Rover had been designed with the lucrative North American market in mind, but safety legislation introduced in the early 70s meant the car wouldn't be sold there officially at all, with British Leyland withdrawing Land Rover from the US market completely in 1974. Grey market imports were the only option for Americans at that time, with certain North American dealers taking it upon themselves to make the necessary safety and emissions modifications themselves. In 1987, with fuel injection replacing carburation, and therefore making emissions control easier, Range Rover of North America was finally established to import factory US spec cars. Demand far exceeded supply, leading to cars being sold on at a premium. By 1988, there were 65 dealers across the US, which in 1992 became Land Rover North America. Despite its ever-increasing luxury status, the Range Rover found work in many utility roles, notably police and fire services, including 6-wheeled airport fire conversions. The car even served as a Popemobile, with 3 converted for John Paul II's UK visit in 1982. These Ogle-designed vehicles were the first Popemobiles to be fully bulletproof, and one was taken back to the Vatican, still reported to have been in service as late as 2013. By the end of its original run, the Range Rover Classic, as it was now known, had found itself at all echelons of society, from the Pope to royals to police and gangsters. This icon of engineering and design constructed a legacy which is still traded on by its descendants today, no matter how hard the P38 worked to ruin it.